All right, well, let's be cognizant of folks' time. Vijay, welcome. Thanks for joining us, and other people will join us in the few minutes. Thank you for taking the time to attend our webinar and learn the reason why data processes fail in financial services. Just some housekeeping, excuse me. Initially, we will have John Morrell and Christopher Stevens have a discussion on the state of kind of data processes and data in financial services. And then Joe Murphy will do a demo. And after that, we will take live questions. If you do have any live questions, please put them in the Q&A in the Zoom platform, and we'll be able to answer them at the end. We'll probably leave about 10 to 15 minutes for questions. So with that, let's get started. Gentlemen, take it away, please.
Thanks, folks. So as Loretta mentioned, we've got a special visitor here today, Chris Stevens, who's now a consultant, but is a former CDO for Geico, so knows a lot about the financial services industry and can talk to a lot about the data problems there. There's myself, and there's Joe Murphy, our senior solutions architect, who has tremendous experience, not only working with our product, but other similar products, as well as helping to implement them for financial services firms. As Loretta mentioned, our agenda today is Chris and I are going to talk a little bit about some of the trends that are going on, what happens when you have things like bad data in your data supply chain, some of the data operations stress points that we're hearing about from our customers. And then we'll talk a little bit about who Acceldata is, and then Joe will get into the meat of stuff and actually demo our product and show you some specific use cases in terms of how you can maximize your data reliability with Acceldata. So Chris, I know you have a ton of experience as both a CDO as well as a CDO in financial services with companies like Geico and others. What do you see kind of going on in the financial services world right now?
Yeah, thanks, John. It's nice to be here. You know, you've got a couple bullet points up on the screen, and the thing is, we could probably talk for an hour about each one of those and how those trends are emerging in the industry, both in the data space or in it particularly as relates to observability and financial services. You probably can't have a data conversation in 2023 if you don't start on the left hand of our slide here, thinking about distributed data and responsibility models. People are aspiring towards data meshes, either building and implementing some data meshes. There's a lot of really great work going on out there that you can, kind of find some folks talking about successes that they're having. And, to me, whether you're explicitly setting out to build a data mesh kind of by definition and by design, as Zhamak and the team have sort of mapped it out, or you're just building self-service data platforms for teams around your organization to be able to use data, move data, enrich data themselves, right, without having to rely on a single centralized team. The more that you distribute the responsibility for doing the data work around your organization, the more that ability to monitor, observe, and maintain trust in your data becomes this sort of wider surface area, if you will. And so I think that's a really big and important thing for all of us data leaders to keep in mind is, as the model is, let's emerge out of these kind of big centralized teams and share the work around the organization, making sure that we have trust in the data that we're all using as we distribute that responsibility around the organization is huge. Certainly then, as you move from just distributing work and building platforms for teams and towards kind of data mesh principles, now you've got data products themselves that are being created and managed and operated by perhaps different organizations around your company, different teams around your company. So again, being able to understand the health of those and how they're interacting as that sort of web gets more complex, I think is huge, just so vitally important. And then if you combine that one with the next one on our slide here, increased regulation and compliance. So if I'm distributing work and I'm distributing responsibility for data and the data products that people are creating, it stands to reason those data products might be subject to regulation and compliance, certainly privacy and other things. So now combining those two together, with whether it's privacy regulations or certainly in insurance, we're accountable to 51 insurance regulators around the country, state by state, to report on reserving and the other elements of our business. These are really a big deal. And, there was a case in my past where, we had some reporting that was regulatory reporting that was subject to some issues in our data that we had the potential for massive, greater than $100 million fines associated with, being out of compliance. Now, luckily, we were able to resolve that. But these are real meaty problems and hefty things that kind of weigh on the shoulders of data leaders, especially in regulated industries like insurance, finance, healthcare. So this is a big deal. And then, like I said, if you combine those first two together, it's one thing to say all the data people are in the data office, they all work on the same team. We can kind of manage and control, some sort of central management function, if you will. When you distribute that around, it becomes even more important. It's probably exponentially more challenging and complex to make sure that your data is of the right quality, that your data, you haven't had drift in your data, that source systems as they're changing haven't impacted downstream reporting and so on. So huge impact, especially when you think of those two together. Next, talking about AI and ML and the growth, in financial services industry, but certainly in the data and technology industry more broadly. We were joking as we were coming on board that we can't have a data conversation in 2023 also without talking about generative AI. And so, what I see in my peers and other folks, certainly in financial services, is trying to understand how advanced machine learning technologies, how AI systems, generative AI and others can be used and leveraged inside of our business to make for better customer experiences, make for more operational efficiency in our business and so on. And I don't know, I came up with this tagline, I think, unless I stole it by accident from somebody else. But, to me, I think about it like, if you don't trust your data for BI, then how are you going to trust it for AI, right? So as those decisions become more automated and the interactions that your customers are having or your associates internal are having with your business, having AI, centered processes living at the middle of those certainly is something we should all be looking at. But again, with that then comes the extra impetus to make sure that my data that's going into those models is of the shape and quality and so on that I expect it to be. Otherwise, given the automated nature of, how those AI systems work, I may have outcomes that I didn't anticipate. The best I could hope for is that they're just embarrassing kind of for my brand. Of course, the worst could be, catastrophic for our organization. So definitely a big thing on people's minds, lots and lots of curiosity, lots and lots of, teams kind of really experimenting with how these things are going to affect their business. So keeping your eye on that data foundation to make sure that your data is of the right quality and shape and it hasn't been shifting and changing over time. So much more important as you think about AI and automated systems. And then, on the other side, again, something of a combination of a lot of these things, a lot of, the financial services industry, the bigger players in those spaces are big organizations, and there's reasons that they're big, and that's a good thing. But that makes them subject to pressure from much more nimble firms. And thinking of the acquisition space in insurance, there's a lot of interesting players there doing interesting work, but they're able to move so fast because they're digitally native people, digitally native organizations. They don't have legacy systems that they're still bringing along. So it allows them to be faster and react to market trends and customer demand a lot faster typically than some of their bigger organizations like I've been a part of. And so how you blend all these things together, helping make your organization, more data driven and using better data to make decisions, underlying that is like, I have to be able to rely on my data or, all bets are off for all these things.
Thanks, Chris. So, and you mentioned a little bit about this in what you just talked about, but bad or poor quality data can have a huge impact in many different places, many different processes, many different departments in financial services. I've worked in the past with a number of different financial services firms, and regulatory reporting and compliance was a big one where data needed to have high quality. One of the firms I actually worked with in the past was actually got the heftiest fine for anti-money laundering poor anti-money laundering reporting
Yeah.
ever, right? So what impact have you seen in the past around bad data, and or even now some examples that you've sort of seen recently?
Yeah, the thing is that certainly, like the list indicates, compliance, risk, regulations, like those are a big deal, and it cannot be understated how big of a deal that is when you're working in an industry like insurance, in an industry like financial services more broadly. Like you said, whoever that was, but largest fine ever levied. I'm sure we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, right? I mentioned briefly, another regulatory reporting thing in my past. Again, hundreds of millions of dollars. Like these are a big deal. But I want to talk a little bit about like the other side of that. Whether it's poor customer experience, slower business processes, and whatnot, because there's a lot of kind of talk in the ethosphere about chief data officers, and it's a 18 to 24 month role, and it's such a hard job, and why is it a hard job, and why is the tenure not as long as it should be, and so on and so forth. And I happen to think a lot of it comes down to trust. And at the end of the day, the thing that the chief data officer is trying to provide for their organization, whether it's through risk assessments, capital R, risk work in financial services, compliance work and reporting to regulatory agencies, or providing business dashboards every morning to the C-suite, it's being able to trust that what's reported in those risk assessments, reported in the regulatory reporting, reported in our business processes, or the data that we're using for AI and ML, like we talked about a second ago, that can be trusted. And unfortunately, what happens is when every machine learning model, it fails because the data was off. Every regulatory reporting incident that comes up, I mean, God forbid, $100 million fine, but all these things begin to sort of erode the trust in your data inside of your organization. And I think that starts to hit the people that work in the data office, whether they're the chief data officer or the people on the team. There's like this eroding trust that just sort of persists on the data, on the processes, and then becomes sort of attached to the team. So being able to get in front of that, you may have heard me tell this funny story, but maybe it's not funny, but in one of my chief data officer roles in the past, I would get a call or a text from the CEO at like 5:30 in the morning or so, and he would say that such and such report, was wrong. And so then my team would go chase down, well, what happened? Did one of our pipelines fail? Was some of the data off? Whatever. And most of the time, by the way, we would find out nothing was wrong. Just business hadn't performed as much as the way that he had hoped it would. But I wasn't armed with any information to help me tell that story. So what he actually would do is read the report at 5 a.m, and then he would call like the CMO or the CFO or the COO or whatever and ask them, what's going on? Why is business not where I thought it was going to be? Oh, our campaigns are performing fine. It can't be that. Oh, the supply chain's operating fine. It can't be that. It must be the data. It must be the data. It must be the data, right? And then you get to me and I would be like, I don't know. I don't think it's the data, but let me find out. And then 6 hours later, I would come back and say, it wasn't the data this time, I promise, right? But over that period of time, you can see how this trust erosion sort of happens. So again, can underscore how important, regulatory risk, regulatory compliance, those things are absolute vital to operating and staying in operations, in a regulated industry like financial services or insurance. But there's this whole other side, which probably happens more often. It's almost like happens every day. I don't trust the data. The pipeline didn't, crashed. My report doesn't seem right. It's like a lot of that stuff that teams end up spending so much of their time on, and then they can't get in front of innovation. They can't spend the right amount of time on the things that they want to be doing or should be doing for the organization.
So regardless of what industry you're in, data operations are really difficult these days. And in financial services, there's even extra stress because, while volumes of data may be big in other industries, in financial services, it's huge,
Yep.
right? The number of different processes that data supports in financial services is huge. So what are some of the data operations stress points that you've encountered? I mean, you talked a little bit about data pipelines, for example, in the last example. So
Yeah, I mean, as illustrated here, actually, it's probably a good example. You know, again, back to like the modern kind of thinking around architectures and distributed systems design, whether it's, you know, you think of your containerized applications and microservice patterns, or applying some of those to the data space, right? What you have are, again, lots of distributed systems, which therefore indicate lots of distributed teams working on things kind of in parallel, basically in conjunction with each other, but it's much more of a complex web, right? So you have all of these pipelines, right, that are moving data from all these different source systems, some of them enriching it along the way before it lands in another operational system, or sometimes landing in a data warehouse for analytics purposes, or both, right? But, you know, those are proliferating and multiplying as they should be, as more and more people are making use and value of the data, right? Again, on the user side, right, I've got all these people now around the organization that I've empowered to build their own data pipelines, to do their own reporting and analytics, to do their own data enrichment. And that's beneficial to the organization and a good thing. But again, it expands like the surface area that I, as the data officer who's responsible for these things and their quality and operational readiness, you know, have a much broader area that I need to be concerned about. You know, you're mentioning compute infrastructure and reliability there on the bottom. You know, as with this sort of like, I don't know, platform era that we're all operating in, like we're all, I want to build platforms that enrich data, platforms that move data, platforms that allow people to use data, and they're all self-serve in nature. Now, having visibility to understand, it's fine, I want everyone using these platforms, but now I need to understand what the pattern of their usage is. What does the pattern of their consumption look like? You know, because our, you know, our friends in the cloud data warehousing world, and certainly the hyperscalers, those are consumption-based cost models, which as they should be, by the way, but that controlling that cost then becomes a whole other dimension for, you know, me or the chief data officer to be responsible for, as I'm allowing and empowering more and more people to do more and more work. They're not paying the bill, right? Sure, you can implement, you know, whatever chargeback models, that stuff just sort of gets complicated for accounting purposes. But either way, you know, I don't really want, you know, a data analyst in the supply chain team to have to think too hard about, well, I don't know if I should spin up this as an extra large database in Snowflake or not, or I don't know if I wrote the best SQL in dbt or not, right? I just want them to be empowered to do good work. So I want to make sure that I can see, control those costs, make sure we're managing the infrastructure appropriately. You know, on the last slide, we didn't talk about it, but I love this 1x, 10x, 100x principle that basically say, you know, it's kind of like shifting left and thinking of TDD principles and bringing testing earlier in the workflow. That, you know, if you don't know this 10x, 1x, 10x, 100x thing, it basically says that if I find a problem immediately, so imagine I'm able to identify the source of schema drift because it's data coming out of a source system and I identify it immediately, right? Then that's sort of a 1x problem, right? I can fix that problem immediately. It doesn't have a whole lot of impact on the rest of the ecosystem or as the data flows downstream. That doesn't always happen, right? Sometimes those changes, schema drifts, issues in the data, whatever, make their way into kind of pre-prod systems. That's kind of a 10x thing. It's like 10x the problem, 10x the work, 10x the effort, 10x the impact on me and my team as we go to fix that thing. And then you get in, well, what happens if that issue gets into production, right? That's the 100x. You could probably make that 1000x if you wanted to, in terms of the pain that inflicts on me or my team or our business or our customers, right? To have these things make their way into production. So I love that 1x, 10x, 100x concept. So naturally what you're trying to do is get all the way left. I don't know if that was my left or my right, but get all the way left so that you can find those issues as soon as humanly possible, well before they make it to the cloud data warehouse, well before it's at the end of the line and it's in a report that the CEO calls me at 5 o'clock in the morning to complain about. I want to find those things way, way, way up front.
Thanks, Chris. And that's a really, really good lead into what Acceldata does, right? So the diagram that Chris just showed is very much similar to what we like to use. So, right, these are the 4 key areas of data observability that we capture, help you understand, as well as give you all of this data. We like to call it our multi-layered data foundation, right? So starting in the lower right, we help you with all your data reliability, which includes things like data quality, data reconciliation, data drift, schema drift. We help you automate a lot of checks around that, so you're able to detect and get alerts when problems happen in and around all of this data quality and reliability stuff. You go to the kind of the lower left, right, which is where we help you understand operationally and from a cost perspective what's going on your data infrastructure. So we help you understand what bottlenecks you have, help you optimize your capacity, and help you understand what your costs are, and help you give you a little bit more of a FinOps type of governance on all of that infrastructure. And then to go to the upper left here, which we can talk a little bit about data pipelines. And I know Chris has mentioned this a little bit already, and Joe's going to put a strong emphasis on this, right? Which is we help you understand what's going on with your data pipelines. Have they failed? Where have they failed? Can we detect issues earlier in these data pipelines before things hit these transformation zones or these consumption zones, so you can avoid doing the 10x and 100x cost associated with those problems? And so we do help with all of that shift left processing and shift left data reliability so that you can detect these issues earlier. And then lastly, in and around users, right, which will help you understand what type of user activity is going on, what types of queries they're running against the system, how often they're running these queries, what's the cost of those queries on the system, and how can you better optimize some of these queries. So, and Acceldata is the only vendor in the data observability market that covers all four of these areas. And again, we help you deliver value here at scale. And so to get back a little bit to those stress points, right? You've got stress points in and around data reliability. And that data reliability needs to be monitored all the way up and down your stack, as well as all the way up and down from the left all the way to the right, to the consumption zones, right? We help you understand what's going on with your data pipelines. We help you understand what's going on operationally, so you can provision systems correctly, and in a lot of cases, auto provision systems correctly. As Chris said, you don't want your database administrator saying, yeah, maybe I should make this an XXL, when in reality could still be just an L, right? So you want recommendations about how to do these things, as well as understanding what your resource utilization is and the costs associated with that. And then you can do things like charge back to your particular departments based on those costs, as well as do things like put guardrails in place so that you don't have out of control resource consumption by a particular individual or a particular process. So
if I may, John, I just want to add one thing just from the CDO chair. Like, as I think about, okay, let's talk about this in financial services. When you get all the way to the right of your diagram, somewhere in there is like regulatory compliance and reporting, right? So it's like those are the most important because they're the most impactful to your business, certainly the most painful if you miss that, right? But I think volume-wise, it's all the other stuff, right? Making bad customer experience, the wrong offers, right? On personalization, you name it, all these different things. It's like the volume of issues that come up, whether it's in financial services or elsewhere, are these other things, right? The one that's going to hurt the most naturally is the regulatory compliance stuff. And then the other thing I just want to underscore from where I'm sitting is the importance of the whole thing. My experience in financial services is that we all manage what I would call a multi-generational data ecosystem. So it's not just Snowflake. I've been a Snowflake customer for the record, and I love them, but it's not just that, right? It's not just the modern data stack. It's a multi-generational, more complex thing, right? And so having the ability to look at all of that is so important. Otherwise, it's literally like I'm looking through this pinhole at one piece of my whole ecosystem, and therefore I'm only seeing one small piece of the issues that might be coming up for me and my team. Sorry, I know I interrupted you there.
No, that's okay, Chris, thanks. And so what makes us different? Well, certainly there's the one aspect that Chris just mentioned is the fact that our breadth, and our breadth comes in multiple ways, right? Our breadth of data platform coverage. So your ability to get a holistic view of everything that's going on, but yet at the same time, drill down into a particular data platform if you need to. It's also breadth in terms of the functionality that we surface. I showed you those 4 areas in that cloverleaf diagram that we have. So there's a lot of data that we're able to surface. And we call this our, a multi-layer data. But the other thing is we correlate all this data together. So, and that helps you do things like drill down into particular problems. So if a pipeline fails, was it because there was a data quality issue, right? Or was there just because there was a performance issue? I didn't size the system correctly, and the pipeline broke down because it didn't have enough resource allocated to it, right? So it helps you drill down on these problems and then prevent them in the future by doing the right planning, by doing the right coverage and everything else. We are also built to be operationalized. We are built for operations. And Joe will show you some of our dashboards and stuff like that. But we're designed to help people solve problems, be alerted to problems, monitor for problems, see problems immediately when they happen and fix them. And so they can make sure your data operations continues to run smoothly, effectively, and in good health. And then the other aspect is we have enterprise scale. We have a lot of features, whether that's performance or whether it's our ability to keep a very large data catalog that has classified data and tag data, and then apply policies for things like data reliability at scale in bulk across a variety of different assets at once. So we help you roll all this stuff out at scale to get all this coverage across all of your platforms, all of your data, and to make sure you understand your entire data health. And from that, I'm going to hand things over to Joe, and Joe can walk you through a demo.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Chris. I'm going to grab the screen share. And I'm going to try to pivot a little bit off of what Chris was saying, really thinking about that 5 a.m. call from the CEO, because in essence, they didn't trust what they were seeing. And that trust is easy, as you talked about the trust erosion, a sense of, if I get burned once or burned twice or burned 3 times, I start stepping back. And why is that going to happen? It's just because we haven't operationalized the checks and balances in our systems, the visibility, the observability into what's going on, so that we can trust the results, right? So if I think about a scenario where, hey, maybe I'm in a retail bank and we've actually, embraced the data mesh, and I'm responsible for data products around maybe loyalty programs for our retail banking customers, right? So I'm responsible for that member program data product in the mesh. And that's actually a very complex data product. It's made up of multiple data assets that are available, but sourced from many different systems, right? So I need a way to understand where I stand on that data product on a day-to-day basis. So when I get that 5 a.m. call, I can confidently say, no, my product is reliable, right? So what I'm showing you is a report that gathers information about many of the assets in my data product and tells me how I'm doing, in this case, over the last 30 days for my overall data reliability score. How is my quality? How is my ability to reconcile the source data all the way to that target product? Is that data drifting? Am I getting schema changes in there? And I can measure that over time at a very high level. Now, I'm showing you a dashboard, but to drive this operationally, there's actually a rich alerting framework, because I don't want the 5 a.m. call. I want to be alerted at, maybe 11 p.m. because the pipeline didn't run successfully for the 5 a.m. feed. So I want to be ahead of the curve on all of that. I'm showing you a dashboard, but behind this, to make it operational, is going to be the alerting. The alert's going to bring you to the dashboard to find the result, not go to the dashboard to see if everything's okay. Because if I always have to go to the dashboard to see if everything's okay, I'm going to be having some of that trust erosion, right? I'm not going to believe what I'm going to see, right? Okay, so let's drill a little deeper. I can see my reliability score, which is pretty high, but I see I had previous dips, and these are reconciliation events, right, that are causing, but I can drill down to see different sources. Maybe this Snowflake data source is the end source of my data, but I'm also monitoring farther upstream in this flow, and I'll show you. I'm actually getting data that's sourced from my systems of record into, say, S3, and I'm picking up and checking the reliability there before it's actually published for multiple consumers, maybe out to Kafka, right? So then it eventually gets to my data product, but I want to understand its reliability all across its landscape, as well as the individual assets that are within that landscape, maybe the final products in Snowflake, or some of those assets that are being measured all along their life cycle, right? So I have this view across my landscape and across time, because reliability is not a static thing. It changes over time. So I have the ability to kind of look at it the last 30 days in this running scale, or maybe a different cycle, maybe the last 7 days I want to look in, etc. Now, I also have the concept, it's tough to understand reliability at that macro scale. How do you actually start measuring it? You really need to drive that down into individual policies on assets. What are the rules for the minimum data quality for that data that's going to be ingested and then manipulated into that final data product, right, for this member program? Now, when we talk about a policy, we talk about a business policy. That may be a series of rules and requirements that are intertwined to mean this data is acceptable. This data these codes have to be in the right code list. This data has to be in this range, etc. All those things actually imply a business set of policies, right, that are going to tie to your governance program. And we're trying to operationalize that so that the product will be reliable. So I can look down here, and maybe this is sort of the start of my pipeline. And I've actually got a policy around the data quality. And you can see I have many different types: schema drift, recon, data quality. And I want to take a look. This one's in a warning state, right? It may not be, there is some problems in the data. So I'm going to jump into that one. And what I see is actually the representation of a run of this policy. So essentially, this pipeline is actually moving data to my data product on a scheduled basis. Say every 3 hours, data is moving into that data product. Every 3 hours, I'm checking that input to make sure it meets my data quality requirements before I ingest it, right? And I keep a record. So from an audit perspective, if an auditor ever comes back to me and says, how was this data when it flowed in? I can bring them all the way back to each and every run or test I've run on this data and give them detailed input to say, here are all the rules that we checked. Maybe I needed to make sure the rows are unique. Maybe I needed to make sure that the email was the right pattern, or the postal zip code was going to be correct, right? Or maybe that the region was in my set of regions. And I can even drill down and show them, well, here are the rows that actually failed. And I could actually block those rows if I chose to in my pipe from moving forward, right? So from an audit perspective, I can get deep insight into, hey, these particular regions failed, and see, oh, I had a state code, and I'm actually getting US territories, Puerto Rico. I wasn't expecting that. Maybe I actually don't have a problem in my data. Maybe I have a problem in my reference data that I haven't updated. I'm getting data from other regions. Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's not. But I have that deep insight, right? And if I ever need to go back to, I can go back in time to see what my score was each step along the way. Okay. Now, I talked about this as part of a pipeline, right? So we also have the ability to observe these pipelines that move this data that's eventually going to produce that member data product, right? And here you see a representation of this pipeline where I'm collecting some input data. I'm evaluating it as a circuit breaker, if you will, to say, hey, should I push this data forward to start operationalizing that 1, 10, 100 rule, right? Can I grab that data where I have a problem where it only costs me $1 before it costs me $10 or $100 to deal with, right? And this particular pipeline can be very complex. So I want to be able to measure and monitor the pipeline's execution, right? And alert on if this pipeline fails, if this pipeline starts running slow, or stop the pipeline if the data actually breaks. So I'm looking at this particular run of the pipeline. So just like the policies where I showed you, hey, there's each and every run of the pipeline, I can audit and check on each and every run of the pipeline of the policy, I can do the same on a pipeline. So here's actually the latest run of this pipeline. And we stopped the pipeline because the policy actually failed on the input data. It fell below our threshold to move forward. We stopped the pipeline, did not ingest the data, didn't corrupt the end data product, and in essence, alerted. Let me find my alert tab. Oh, here's my alert tab. We created an alert that said, hey, we have a critical alert, and let me just filter down to it. Get my right filter set, plenty of alerts. The member updates pipeline, we have a critical alert, it has failed. What really happened behind the scenes, while I have this alert here, which would take me to that pipeline, we fired off a ticket, a ServiceNow ticket. We sent an email to the CDO, so he knows the pipeline failed, at 11 p.m. before he gets the phone call, right? We fired Slack messages or Teams messages or emails to all the operational teams, so they're right on what's causing that pipeline error. That email's taking them right here. It says, hey, this job failed. Go find that job and understand why that job is holding up this pipeline, right? And then they can move to resolution on that. Okay. Now, we also are going to give you deep insight into these assets themselves. So I can link all these views together, right? So when you think about how people go to solve operational problems, they do it in a chain, right? They start at one point, they go to the next point in the chain, and they need that progressive path through. So now I can kind of jump right into this, say this asset, this member transaction, this is the source file coming in. And I can see a ton of information about how this asset's been performing, see its quality, see any drift perhaps in the data. Chris talked before about, I have AI models or generative AI at the end that's looking at the data and then making decisions based off the data. A very common feature I find in data engineering is when people build these AI models, they may train them on data sets with specific features engineered, right? So the data features, right? That may be as simple as, hey, we make sure that we're tracking the average transaction amount or the age of a member or some other feature. So they produce some data. A key thing to monitor is the drift of those features. So I may want to understand if data that's flowing through my system starts drifting. It may not be a problem, right? The average age of the member is dropping. That may be good or bad, I don't know. It may affect the model. The average transaction value is changing. It's going higher or lower. That again may not be a problem, but it may affect the model. These sort of anomalies in the data can also trigger alerts so that, we're not stopping the pipeline, but we're being alerted to changes in the data as it's happening, right? All this will drive to greater trust in the data, right? And the ability to drive that exploration. So when the CEO sees a data, sees some data that he doesn't quite understand, you could surface this information so he could drill in and even check himself to say, yes, I'm confident the pipeline, ran correctly and the data quality measures were passed this must really be a failure in the marketing program, or the sales guys, aren't telling me the truth as we get through this, right? So that's bringing all that together is a way that we believe that we can bring a higher level of transparency and trust to the data landscape by surfacing this information, right? By taking the time to operationalize your policies, the governance rules that you may have in place that say, here are the quality requirements, the data from this end of the pipeline to that end of the pipeline must be able to be reconciled so I can track it all the way back, that I must keep the records for audit purposes, for regulatory purposes. If you have the trust and we can surface that to you easily, you'll have a better result as you go forward trying to build these modern data products, these modern data stacks in the future. We're also very focused, as Chris mentioned, if you're not, say, you're not going to be a data owner of a data mesh, but your organization's building out more and more self-service, you'll want to be able to understand, say, the quality or reliability of maybe a product you're working with, right? So our ability to give you even the self-service capability to create your own tests against data with a simple point and click recommendations on things to check about your data, a simple point and click way to create a multi-rule policy so that you can assess the reliability of the data you're working with, can again improve trust as you move forward in this journey. Okay, and you guys asked for about a 15-20 minute demo. I'm gonna stop there for a few minutes, see if we've gotten any questions, and hopefully you've gotten a sense of how you can use data observability all the way from viewing the reliability of a data product, looking at individual executions of data reliability policies, being able to look at pipelines and how they're operating, if they're running slower, are they running faster, are they failing, and then tying that all to an operational posture, an alert-driven system, so that your trust is, or lack of trust is an exception, not the rule, maybe better.
Yeah, I was going to add, Joe, that from where I'm sitting, if you just tie this back to my sort of funny story about BI and 5 a.m. phone calls, but expand that to every other data-related problem that comes my way. Having these, it's sort of like the operational metrics heartbeat of my part of the process. Similar to, you could call the CMO and they're like, no, our click-through rate is fine, our campaigns are activated, or whatever, our out of stocks and inventory are fine, whatever the other people might say. Now I have some of my own operational metrics to say that, our pipelines are running as promised, or I have a data quality contract, so to speak, in place on marketing campaigns. And I can say that I'm meeting that, or whatever. Like, having these things at your disposal is just the proactive element of that is just so important for a data leader.
Right. I like to say, especially for a CDO, one of the biggest challenges for a CDO is making their data governance process operational, right? Getting from defining it is hard enough. And in my history, I've had sold platforms that help people build those. Turning that into an operational posture is incredibly hard. And if you're coming from a data ops perspective, all operations has a hero syndrome, right? We have to be heroes and solve problems. What we need is to drive operations into a governable state, right? So this platform, data observability, I always like to say, is about making operations governable. I know what's going on in there. It's not the Wild West, and it's making governance operational, right? That's the magic.
And the I don't know, the sort of data estate or the ecosystem at a place, I had leadership jobs at Geico and Zendesk and American Eagle Outfitters. So they're all different sizes. Even the smaller of those places still have thousands and thousands of data pipelines and processes that run. So something's wrong with something, somebody tells me, right? Having the ability to triage, in a proactive way across all the possible, permutations is just so important to help. It's just to have that map to get started is so helpful.
Right. And I think a key factor again for us, one, our focus on being operational. Two, our understanding that problems don't confine themselves to just one of these domains, right? Today, the pipeline was late, so we didn't produce the data for the report for the CEO. Well, why today, right? Was it, as John said before, the underlying platform, ran out of resources, or somebody did something and, actually suspended our Snowflake account by accident, or I don't know. Or, the data that flew in, suddenly had 50% null in account code. What just happened, right? Or we got, data from 10 states, not 50 states, right? So we stopped the pipeline. Is it a quality problem? Is it a drift problem? Is it some other critical problem? Finding where that is, it's not confined to neatly to say, hey, it's a quality problem.
And that goes like to the 1, 10, 100x thing, where I jokingly was like, it's more like a 1000x thing. Think about an operation like a big insurance company like Geico, and your thing, like, we just got data from 10 states instead of 50. That's going to affect like everything, maybe literally everything, right? So it's not like one report didn't go to one person that's going to call and give me a hard time.
Right.
It's like everything broke. So then it's again, it might be 100x, sometimes it might be 1,000,000x, right? So if I can get in front of that at the very beginning, that whole shifting left thing, and like you said, operationalizing it, just prevents so much strife and toil and agony downstream.
Absolutely, right. That's the, we all have lived that triage call where they've got 50 people on the call trying to figure out what broke where, right? And everybody's magically saying, it wasn't me, I look good, I look good, I look good, trying to correlate the signals to figure out where the problem is the hardest part. And that's what we're trying to do. Do we have everything solved? No, there's plenty of hard work still to do, but bringing this together across a diverse landscape, we've got the foundation. We've done I'm excited about the work we've done.
Me too.
Here. So
do we have any questions, Loretta?
You have some questions, so let's move into that, and then we can let people go about their day. So let's talk a little bit about security. Obviously, that's very key in financial services. So Joe, there's a question about data leaving our site with Acceldata.
Sure.
Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. We operate we operate a SaaS platform, but honestly, it's a hybrid platform, call it. The application I'm showing you is a SaaS application. However, we deploy what we call a data plane, essentially a compute infrastructure into our client's infrastructure. That is the only element that actually touches their data. We just communicate from our SaaS application to that data plane, right? The data plane only ever sends metadata to our platform, right? That's information about, hey, here are the asset names, et cetera, but not any of the data in the asset. Here's the policies that we're going to store and the runs and information about those runs. Any customer data always stays on the customer side of the fence, right? We don't want your data, let me put it that way, right? Your data is very sensitive. We don't want it. We run a very secure platform in our cloud that has metadata and your policies aimed at assessing your data, but even that is secured within ours, partitioned for each and every one of our clients and encrypted. But no, we don't ever remove any data from your client environment.
Great. Okay. So the next one is, everybody's talking about AI, generative AI, et cetera. So, I'm sure you're not surprised by this question, but how do you help for AI and ML processes?
Sure, there's a number of avenues, but it all gets back to what Chris said. Can you trust the data? If you don't trust it for your BI, how can you trust it for AI, right? How can your AI make correct decisions? So one, all of the data reliability work is critical to feeding that data into your generative AI models, your machine learning models. I mentioned it before, things like data drift can help you understand if the data you've trained your models on starts moving, right? As I said before, I've worked with data engineers that then engineer features in their data, right? And then train their models on that data. And then track their model performance, right? But our ability to track changes in those features can help them, alert them to say, hey, maybe my model performance is dropping. They can look back and say, oh, these features are shifting. I may need to retrain, right? So that's sort of one avenue. I've even said, in our platform, I showed very quickly, hey, self-service, point and click, put rules, etc. in. We actually have in our platform the ability to even create user-defined functions, if you will, rules that you want, and we can even let you build your own sort of, if you build your own model, right, and package that up properly, we can even bring that into a rule so that you could even run your model against the data coming in to say, hey, I have an AI model that's going to score this record. Does it pass or fail the score? We can even include that into our platform. So there's a lot of different ways we can help, but at the core, we need to make sure the data is reliable to feed those models.
Yep, makes perfect sense. And the last question, let's talk a little bit about implementation. Obviously, you talked about how this is kind of a SaaS platform, but can you just go into that a little bit?
Sure. So we have multiple, it's the classic, it depends, right? So we have lots of capability across these dimensions. This could be, say, I just want to get a handle on maybe how Snowflake is operating, or maybe my Databricks environment is operating. This could be, set up in a couple of hours or less, right? Basically, sign up for a service. We set up the right permissions to look at Snowflake for you, et cetera. We can start observing your Snowflake environment, right? You want to start diving into the data reliability. It's a little bit more. We have to deploy a little bit more platforms. That data plane has to get deployed. That could be, I do them in, an hour or two. Honestly, with an organization, a financial services organization, there's a lot of security platform things you're going to talk. We'll work with you. That could be a day, 2 days, could be longer depending on your organization, right? To deploy some software into your organization. But then it's the scanning can be automated to get information about your assets. And then, it's building out these policies, right? So we can do a lot of discovery and recommend them. But again, these are going to be business aspects. So this is where I think bringing in the governance team, bringing in the business owners to understand what those business rules are will take a little bit longer. And then if you actually want to go to pipeline observability, it may take a little bit more effort. So anywhere from, a couple hours in a day to a couple of weeks, or if you're a big organization and going to do a big program, honestly, the effort's going to be in the program management, and you could move out into sort of months as you move your program forward. But again, that's driving business value. Now, the key thing is to build your program in manageable chunks. Chris would tell you any real world effort to bring value across a complex enterprise like Geico or other large financial services people, you have lots of stakeholders you have to bring to the table, and then plan that out successfully, right? So I'd love to say, hey, drop it in, you've got value, but the reality of these systems is you need all those people coming in. can drop in hours and start bringing value, and I've seen that with our clients. But for complex financial services and enterprise, this is going to be a project or program really that you're going to manage and drive out and connect into all your other programs, whether it's your data mesh program, etc.
Great. Well, yeah, that definitely all makes sense. So I think that's it for the questions. Appreciate everyone's time today. Thanks so much, Joe, John, and Chris. Appreciate your insights and input. And everyone have a great day, and we'll follow up with you and check your interest post webinar. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, folks.